The rolling plains of Montana stretched like a golden sea beneath the vast sky, where fortunes were made in cattle, not gold. Here, success announced itself with the expanse of one's land and the size of their herds. This was no place for second chances or faded dreams, or so Catherine Morgan thought, until she stepped off the train in Clearwater Springs, carrying nothing but a worn leather suitcase and 38 years of dashed hopes. She was about to learn that sometimes life's most beautiful chapters begin precisely when you believe the story is over. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The steam from the locomotive curled into the crisp autumn air as the train pulled into Clearwater Springs' modest station. Catherine Morgan stood on the platform, straightening her simple navy dress and adjusting the plain hat that did little to conceal the silver strands woven through her chestnut hair. Her finger traced the outline of the letter in her pocket, the correspondence that had brought her across 3 states to this remote corner of Montana Territory in 1885. "Final stop! Clearwater Springs," the conductor called, his voice nearly drowned by the hiss of the engine. Catherine took a deep breath. That did nothing to calm the fluttering in her stomach. At 38, she knew this journey represented perhaps her final chance at building a life beyond the confines of spinsterhood in Philadelphia, where opportunities for women her age had dwindled to charity work and caring for others' children. Platform bustled with activity. Cowboys loading supplies, families reuniting, merchants eyeing crates of goods. Catherine waited for the crowd to thin before collecting her suitcase, her movements deliberate and dignified. She had learned long ago that rushing only led to mistakes, and at this juncture in her life, she could afford none. "You must be the Easterner," said a voice behind her. Catherine turned to find a weathered woman with kind eyes and practical clothing. "Mrs. Abigail Holloway," the woman introduced herself. "I run the mercantile with my husband. Thomas Reed asked me to meet you." "Yes, I'm Catherine Morgan," she replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for the welcome." Abigail's eyes made a quick assessment, lingering momentarily on Catherine's face before warming with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thomas mentioned you'd be arriving today. I've arranged a room for you at our boarding house until things are settled." As they walked toward a waiting wagon, Catherine noticed whispers following them down the platform, a group of younger women huddled together, their glances both curious and dismissive. "My word, she's old enough to be his aunt," one murmured, not bothering to lower her voice. "Thomas Reed could have his pick of any girl in 3 counties, another added. "Why send east for someone so seasoned?" Catherine maintained her composure, though a flush crept up her neck. The comments weren't unexpected. She'd prepared herself for scrutiny and judgment. Thomas Reed's advertisement had been clear. Successful cattle rancher 42 seeks educated, practical woman for marriage and companionship. His letter accepting her response had been equally straightforward, mentioning his impressive property, the Circle R Ranch, and his need for a partner to help manage his growing business interests. What he hadn't mentioned was any concern about age, which Catherine had disclosed honestly in her first letter. His acceptance had given her hope that perhaps here, far from Philadelphia's rigid social hierarchies, a woman might be valued for her intellect and character rather than youth and beauty alone. "Don't mind them," Abigail said as they reached the wagon. "Folks here aren't accustomed to much beyond their own horizons. They'll settle once they know you." "I'm quite used to people's judgments, Mrs. Holloway," Catherine replied, her voice even. "After teaching in a girls' school for 16 years, very little surprises me." The wagon journey from the station revealed Clearwater Springs as a growing frontier town, Wooden buildings lined a main street bustling with activity, while church spires and a schoolhouse suggested aspirations toward permanence and civilization. Beyond the town limits, the landscape opened into vast rangeland that seemed to stretch forever under the enormous Montana sky. "The Circle R is the largest spread in the county," Abigail explained as they passed smaller homesteads. Thomas Reed arrived with nothing 15 years ago and built an empire through sheer determination. He's not a man who accepts failure in himself or others. Catherine nodded, absorbing this information while watching the unfamiliar landscape unfold. She had researched ranch life extensively before accepting Thomas's proposal, reading everything, from agricultural journals to novels about Western settlement. But no book could capture the sheer vastness of this place, the sense of possibility and peril contained in equal measure. "Is Mr. Reed meeting us today?" Catherine asked, suddenly aware that she would soon be face to face with the man she had agreed to marry. Abigail's hesitation was brief but noticeable. Thomas was called to Helena on urgent business, railroad negotiations. He left word that he'll return in 3 days' time. Catherine's heart sank slightly at this unexpected delay, though she maintained her composed expression. "I see. That's perfectly understandable for a businessman of his stature." "The boarding house is comfortable," Abigail continued clearly, eager to change the subject. "Several respectable widows live there permanently. It's run by my sister-in-law, Martha Holloway. You'll be well situated until Thomas returns." When they reached the boarding house, a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a wide porch, Catherine was shown to a modest but clean room on the 2nd floor. Martha Holloway, a thin woman with shrewd eyes, showed. "None of her sister-in-law's warmth. Suppers at 6 sharp," she informed Catherine. "We keep regular hours here. No gentlemen callers in private rooms, though I suppose that won't be a concern for you." Left alone, Catherine unpacked her few belongings, arranging them with the precision that had become second nature during her years of teaching. Her clothing was practical but well made. Dark skirts and white blouses suited to a teacher or a rancher's wife. Among her possessions were several treasured books, a writing case, and a small wooden box containing her mother's cameo brooch, her sole inheritance. As she placed the books on the bedside table, a knock at the door announced Abigail's return. The merchant's wife carried a tray with tea and biscuits. "I thought you might need refreshment after your journey," she said, setting down the tray. She hesitated before adding, "There's something you should know, Catherine, about Thomas." Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "Please speak freely." "Thomas Reed is a complicated man," Abigail began, "brilliant with business and beloved in this community for his generosity. But he's also particular. He has expectations few can meet." She paused. "3 women have come before you in the past 2 years. Mail-order brides, like yourself. None remained longer than a fortnight." "I see," Catherine said quietly, absorbing this revelation. "May I ask why they left?" "The first was too frivolous. Spent his money on fripperies from my store before. They'd even married. The second couldn't abide the isolation of ranch life. And the third," Abigail sighed. "She was a pretty little thing, barely 20. Thomas sent her back east after one dinner together. Said she lacked the maturity to be a rancher's wife." Catherine's expression remained neutral, though her mind worked rapidly to process this information. "And what exactly has Mr. Reed said about my arrival?" Abigail hesitated. "Only that you were coming, and to arrange accommodations. But Catherine, there's talk among the ranch hands. His foreman, Jackson Miller, mentioned that Thomas was surprised when he received your daguerreotype, that you were older than he anticipated, despite what your letters stated." "I was entirely truthful about my age and circumstances," Catherine replied, her voice firm despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. I believe you, Abigail said kindly. And 38 is hardly ancient, despite what these frontier girls might think. You've experience and education, rare commodities out here. But Thomas Reed has unusual notions about the wife he seeks. Just prepare yourself for anything when he returns. After Abigail left, Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar town that might, or might not, become her home. The journey from Philadelphia had consumed nearly all her savings. To return so soon would mean not only financial ruin, but also facing the pitying glances of former colleagues who had warned her against this Western adventure. Her reflection in the window glass showed a woman still handsome, with intelligent, hazel eyes and fine features. The silver in her hair had appeared early, following her father's death and the subsequent loss of their family home. Life's hardships had left visible marks, but they had also forged a strength in her that no mirror could reflect. 3 days, she whispered to herself. 3 days to prove her worth in a town already judging her as inadequate, to prepare for a meeting with a man who might reject her on sight. The challenge was daunting, but Catherine Morgan had never shied from difficult circumstances. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin exploring Clearwater Springs, learning its rhythms and needs. If Thomas Reed sought a practical partner rather than a decorative bride, she would demonstrate her value before he even returned. And if he still found her wanting, well, a woman who had rebuilt her life once, after losing everything, could certainly do so again. As the sun set over the Montana plains, Catherine unpinned her hair and began brushing it with methodical strokes. 100 counted brush strokes, just as her mother had taught her, a ritual that had survived schoolrooms, heartbreaks, and now this journey into uncertainty. Some habits provided comfort even when everything else changed. In 3 days, her future would be decided, for better or worse. But tonight, she would rest and gather her strength for whatever challenges awaited in this vast, unforgiving, yet strangely beautiful new world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Catherine's boarding house room, casting delicate patterns across the wooden floor. She had risen before dawn, a habit formed during years of teaching when early hours provided her only moments of solitude. After dressing in her most practical skirt and a crisp white blouse, she pinned her hair in a simple but elegant knot and descended to the dining room. She was surprised to find it already occupied. A grey-haired woman sat alone at the long oak table, reviewing documents through wire-rimmed spectacles. She looked up when Catherine entered, her shrewd eyes appraising, but not unkind. "You must be Miss Morgan," the woman said, setting aside her papers. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Watts, the town's only physician, much to the dismay of certain traditional elements." "A female doctor," Catherine replied with genuine admiration. "How remarkable!" Dr. Watts smiled wryly. "Remarkable to some, scandalous to others, and absolutely necessary to a frontier town where half the population is female. Please join me." As they shared a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee, Dr. Watts provided Catherine with a more nuanced introduction to Clearwater Springs than she had received from the Holloways. "This town stands at a crossroads," the doctor explained. "The railroad's arrival 3 years ago transformed us from a cattle outpost to a growing hub. There's old money, ranching families who've been here since the territory was established, and new commerce brought by the trains. The tension between tradition and progress defines nearly everything here." "And where does Thomas Reed stand in this division?" Catherine asked, carefully stirring her coffee. Dr. Watts considered the question. "Thomas is a paradox. He built his Fortune through innovation, crossbreeding cattle for hardiness, implementing irrigation systems other ranchers mocked until they saw his yields. Yet in personal matters, he's remarkably traditional. He wants the Circle R to become a dynasty, which requires an appropriate wife and heirs. Catherine absorbed this information, measuring it against the formal yet warmly worded letters she had exchanged with Thomas. His correspondence had revealed an educated mind and practical ambition, but little of his personal complexities. "You're wondering if he'll find you suitable," Dr. Watts stated matter-of-factly. "Is my concern so transparent?" Catherine asked with a small smile. "To someone who's spent 40 years reading people's unspoken ailments?" "Yes." The doctor removed her spectacles. "I treated Thomas after a horse-breaking accident last year. He's a proud man, Miss Morgan, accustomed to controlling his environment and all within it. His ideal wife exists in his mind as clearly as a blueprint. Someone educated but deferential, capable but compliant, young enough to bear children, but mature enough to manage his household. I meet only some of those criteria," Catherine acknowledged. "Indeed. But Thomas Reed's ideals and Thomas Reed's needs are not the same thing." Dr. Watts tapped her papers meaningfully. "This town has grown beyond what its institutions can support. The school is overcrowded, with one overworked teacher managing 60 children across 8 grade levels. The mercantile stocks books, but has no proper library. The women who've arrived with the railroad's expansion have no formal gathering place for education or community." Catherine leaned forward, intrigued. "You're suggesting that Clearwater Springs needs more than another rancher's wife?" "I'm suggesting that value takes many forms, Miss Morgan. Thomas may be seeking a conventional bride, but this community needs capable women who can build something meaningful. Whether or not you become Mrs. Reed, your skills needn't go to waste. Here." After breakfast, Catherine set out to explore the town, her mind buzzing with the possibilities Dr. Watts had implied. Clearwater Springs was larger than she had initially perceived, with a main street bustling with commerce and smaller residential streets branching outward. The newly built train station anchored one end of town, while the imposing stone courthouse dominated the other. She paused outside the schoolhouse during morning recess, watching children of various ages playing in the dusty yard. The single teacher, a young woman barely out of her teens, looked overwhelmed as she attempted to resolve a dispute between 2 boys while simultaneously comforting a crying girl and preventing smaller children from wandering toward the street. "Miss Hayes could certainly use an experienced hand," came a voice beside her. Catherine turned to find Abigail Holloway approaching with a basket of groceries. "The school board can't afford another teacher," Abigail continued, "though heaven knows we need one. Miss Hayes is dedicated but untrained. She was simply the only unmarried woman with enough education to take the position when Mr. Peterson left. To seek gold in Alaska, 60 students for one teacher is impossible," Catherine observed. "How do the older children advance their studies with so little individual attention?" "Most don't," Abigail replied frankly. "Boys leave school by 14 to work ranches or businesses. Girls might stay longer but learn little beyond basic arithmetic and literature. Higher education means sending children east, an expense few families here can bear." Catherine watched a bright-eyed girl of about 12 helping younger children with their letters in the schoolyard. The girl had natural teaching instincts, demonstrating patience and clarity as she guided small hands through the alphabet. "That's Sarah Thornton," Abigail offered, following Catherine's gaze. "Sharp as a tack, that one. Reads everything she can get her hands on at our store. Her father works as foreman at the Circle R, actually." "Jackson Miller." "No, that's Thomas's. Ranch foreman. Sarah's father, Daniel Thornton, runs the horse operation. He's a widower, raising 3 children while managing 60 horses. Sarah practically mothers her younger siblings." An idea began forming in Catherine's mind. "Mrs. Holloway, does the town, Have any sort of afternoon education program? Perhaps for advanced students or adult learning?" Abigail laughed softly. "Miss Morgan, until 5 years ago, this town barely had proper buildings. We're still establishing the necessities, though I'll admit my Ladies' Aid Society has discussed the need for additional educational opportunities." "Why do you ask?" "I have 3 days before Mr. Reed returns," Catherine replied. "I'd prefer to spend them productively rather than simply waiting for judgment." That afternoon, with Abigail's help, Catherine secured permission to use the church meeting room for an educational enrichment gathering the following day. Notices were posted at the Mercantile, the post office and the train station, inviting advanced students and adults interested in literature and composition to attend. "You understand, this may not endear you to Thomas," Abigail warned as they finalized the arrangements. "He admires initiative in business, but might find it presumptuous in a prospective wife. If Mr. Reed finds independent thought objectionable in a partner, it's better we discover that incompatibility immediately," Catherine replied, her pen moving steadily as she outlined a curriculum plan. "Besides, I've never been one to sit idle when there's useful work to be done." That evening at the boarding house dinner table, Catherine found herself the center of attention as word of her impromptu educational program had spread throughout the small community. Martha Holloway's usually austere expression had softened slightly, while 2 elderly widows who permanently resided at the boarding house peppered her with questions about her teaching experience in Philadelphia. "Will you include poetry analysis?" asked Mrs. Beatrice Caldwell, a former opera singer who had followed her daughter west after being widowed. "I've so missed cultural discussion since leaving Boston." "My grandson shows remarkable aptitude for mathematics," contributed Mrs. Viola Sherman, the quieter of the 2 widows. "But poor Miss Hayes hasn't the time to nurture his talent." Catherine answered their questions thoughtfully, outlining her plans, while being careful not to overpromise. "This is merely an exploratory gathering," she emphasized, "to assess interest and needs. It's more cultural initiative than we've seen in years," declared Dr. Watts, who had joined them for dinner. "Regardless of what transpires with Thomas Reed, Miss Morgan, you've already identified a significant community need." Later that night, as Catherine prepared for bed, a knock at her. Doctor revealed Martha Holloway holding a stack of tattered books. "These belong to my late husband," the boarding house proprietor said, extending the volumes somewhat awkwardly. "Shakespeare, Emerson, some mathematics texts. They might prove useful for your gathering tomorrow." Surprised by this unexpected support from the previously cool woman, Catherine accepted the books with sincere thanks. "I was a teacher myself before marrying Mr. Holloway," Martha confessed, "in a one-room schoolhouse in Ohio. Not as prestigious as your Philadelphia Academy, but I understand the calling." "Teaching is teaching, wherever it happens," Catherine replied warmly. "The desire to nurture minds doesn't change with geography." Martha nodded, a moment of understanding passing between them. "Sleep well, Miss Morgan. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Alone again, Catherine examined the well-worn books, their margins filled with careful notations in a precise masculine hand. Each volume represented knowledge that had traveled west in someone's precious luggage space, chosen over extra clothing or comforts because its value transcended the material. She sat at the small writing desk and opened her journal, recording her observations of Clearwater Springs and its people. The town possessed greater complexity than she had anticipated, with undercurrents of aspiration that reached beyond cattle and commerce. There existed here a hunger for education and refinement that perhaps matched her own need for purpose and connection. As she prepared to close her journal, Catherine paused, pen hovering over the page. She had not yet allowed herself to fully consider what would happen if Thomas Reed rejected her as too old upon his return. The prospect of such humiliation after traveling so far was daunting. Yet today had revealed possibilities she hadn't considered when boarding the train in Philadelphia. "Perhaps," she wrote, "there are different forms of partnership than the one I journeyed here to find. If one door closes, I must be prepared to seek another." She closed the journal and extinguished the lamp, lying awake in the darkness as wagon. Wheels occasionally rumbled past on the street below. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now, it was enough to know she had begun creating a place for herself in Clearwater Springs. Independent of Thomas Reed's judgment or approval, Catherine's last thought before drifting to sleep was of the Circle R Ranch that lay somewhere beyond the town limits, the empire built by the man who might become her husband or her most significant disappointment. Either way, she was determined to face him in 3 days' time as a woman of demonstrated value, not merely as a hopeful supplicant awaiting his verdict. The church meeting room transformed under Catherine's efficient hands. She arrived shortly, after dawn, rearranging the heavy oak tables into a semicircle rather than rows, creating an environment for discussion rather than passive listening. Fresh wildflowers, gathered during an early morning walk, brightened the otherwise austere space. Catherine had spent half the night planning a curriculum flexible enough to accommodate various ages and educational backgrounds. Her leather satchel bulged with notes, writing exercises, and discussion questions. The familiar rhythm of preparation calmed her nerves, reminding her that regardless of her uncertain personal circumstances, she remained a teacher at heart. "You've been busy," remarked Reverend James Porter, the young minister who had arrived to unlock the church. "Most newcomers spend their first days recovering from the journey." "Idle hands make for an anxious mind, Reverend," Catherine replied, arranging Martha Holloway's books on a side table. "Besides, purposeful activity is the best introduction to a community." The minister helped her position the final table, his expression thoughtful. "I understand you're here to meet Thomas Reed." "Yes, he's due to return in 2 days. I've known Thomas since he arrived in Montana Territory. He's a good man, fair in his business dealings and generous to the church." The Reverend paused. "But he can be rigid in his expectations." Catherine met his concerned gaze directly. "So I've gathered. Yet his letters suggested an intelligent man who values education and culture. Those qualities initially drew me to respond to his advertisement." "Thomas contains multitudes, like all of us," Reverend Porter replied diplomatically. "His father was an uneducated cattle driver who died broke. Thomas educated himself through sheer determination, reading by lamplight. After 14-hour workdays, he built the Circle R, from nothing into the territory's most prosperous ranch, which explains his desire for control and certainty," Catherine observed. "Precisely. When you've clawed your way up from nothing, maintaining your position becomes paramount." He gestured around the church. "This building exists because Thomas Reed donated half the lumber and paid for the stained glass windows. Yet he rarely attends services himself, a man of contradictions. Aren't we all?" The Reverend smiled. "I'll leave you to your preparations, Miss Morgan. For what it's worth, I believe your educational initiative is exactly what Clearwater Springs needs." As the morning progressed, Catherine's anxiety about attendance gave way to the opposite concern. By 10 o'clock, 15 minutes before the scheduled start, the meeting room was already filling. Women from town arrived first, shopkeepers' wives, the telegraph operator's sister, 2 young women who worked at the hotel. They were followed by a handful of older students, including Sarah Thornton, the girl Catherine had observed in the schoolyard. "Miss Hayes released us from lessons to attend," Sarah explained, her bright blue eyes alight with excitement. "She said this is an educational opportunity we shouldn't miss." By the time Catherine called the gathering to order, 27 people filled the room. far exceeding her expectations. Ages ranged from 12 to Mrs. Beatrice Caldwell's 73 years. Most surprising was the presence of several men: the apothecary, a railroad clerk, and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Judge Simmons, retired from the Territorial Circuit Court. "Before we begin," Catherine announced, "I want to clarify that this is an exploratory gathering. I'm new to your community and hoping to understand your educational interests and needs." "Are you staying in Clearwater Springs, then?" asked a woman in a practical blue dress. "We heard you were coming to marry Thomas Reed." Catherine maintained her composure despite the direct question. "My future plans depend on several factors. For today, however, I'm simply offering what I can as an experienced educator." She divided the attendees into 3 groups based on their interests: literature and composition, mathematics and science, and history and current events. Each group received discussion materials and specific tasks designed to reveal their knowledge levels and learning aspirations. Catherine moved between groups, providing guidance while assessing capabilities. Sarah Thornton's intellect immediately stood out. The girl devoured complex texts with remarkable comprehension, asking insightful questions that stimulated deeper discussion among the adults in her group. "You've read Dickens before?" Catherine asked after Sarah made a thoughtful comparison between 2 passages. "My mother's books," Sarah explained. "She taught at a girls' academy in St. Louis before marrying Papa and moving west. After she died, her books became my connection to her." The poignancy of this statement touched Catherine deeply. "She would be proud of how you've continued your education." "Papa says the same, though he worries about my prospects. There's no academy here for advanced learning, and he can't afford to send me east." "Perhaps there could be other options," Catherine mused, an idea taking shape as she observed the enthusiastic participation throughout the room. After 2 hours of engaged learning, Catherine brought the groups together to share their discoveries and questions. The energy in the room was palpable. Even the most reserved participants had found their voices through the carefully structured activities. "This has been most illuminating," Catherine concluded as the session ended. "I'm impressed by the intellectual curiosity present in Clearwater Springs. When will you hold the next gathering?" asked the apothecary, who had worked diligently on logarithmic calculations he hadn't attempted since his university days. Catherine hesitated, acutely aware of her precarious position. "That depends on circumstances beyond today's meeting. However, I've prepared packets for each group with additional materials for independent study." As attendees reluctantly dispersed, many lingered to thank Catherine personally. Sarah Thornton was the last to leave, clutching a packet of advanced literature exercises. "This was the best day I've had since Mother died," the girl said earnestly. "It felt like being connected to something larger than Clearwater Springs." Catherine squeezed her hand. "Keep that feeling alive through your reading, Sarah. Minds need nourishment just as bodies do." After the last participant departed, Catherine began reorganizing the room, her mind racing with possibilities. The gathering had revealed a community hungry for intellectual engagement, far more sophisticated than frontier stereotypes suggested. If circumstances allowed her to remain in Clearwater Springs, perhaps she could establish a proper lyceum or advanced academy, regardless of what transpired with Thomas Reed. "It appears your gathering was quite successful." The deep voice startled Catherine. She turned to find a tall man filling the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly spanning its width. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his clean-shaven face was weathered by sun and wind. Though his clothes were trail-dusty, their quality was evident. This was a man of means. "I apologize for interrupting," he continued, stepping into the room. "I saw people leaving and grew curious." Catherine straightened, instinctively smoothing her skirt. "No apology necessary. We've just concluded an educational discussion group. So I gathered. His grey eyes assessed her with keen intelligence. You're new to Clearwater Springs. Yes, I arrived yesterday. He nodded thoughtfully. Education is sorely needed here. I've often thought our rapid economic growth has outpaced our cultural development. Something in his thoughtful articulation and commanding presence triggered a realization. Catherine studied him more carefully. The quality riding boots despite trail dust, the fine silver watch chain, the confident bearing of a man accustomed to authority. "You're Thomas Reed," she stated, rather than asked. Surprise flickered across his features. "I am, though I don't believe we've been properly introduced, Miss Morgan. Catherine Morgan." The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. A slight widening of the eyes, a momentary stillness. He recognized her name, and with it, her purpose in Clearwater Springs. "Miss Morgan," he said finally. "I wasn't expecting that. I was informed you wouldn't arrive until next week." "There was space on an earlier train," Catherine replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. Mrs. Holloway arranged accommodation at the boarding house. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Catherine had imagined their first meeting countless times during her journey west, had rehearsed what she might say, how she would present herself. Now, caught unprepared with her hair coming loose from its pins after hours of teaching and a smudge of chalk on her sleeve, she felt at a distinct disadvantage. Thomas Reed studied her with an unreadable expression. "I've just returned from Helena. Business concluded earlier than anticipated. I was told you wouldn't return for another 2 days." "Plans change, Miss Morgan." His tone remained neutral, betraying neither pleasure nor disappointment at her presence. "It seems we're both ahead of schedule." Before Catherine could respond, Reverend Porter entered the room. "Thomas, welcome back. I didn't realize you'd returned." He looked between them, sensing the tension. "I see you've met Miss Morgan. Her educational gathering was most impressive." "So it appears," Thomas replied, his gaze never leaving Catherine's face. "Reverend, would you be so kind as to formally introduce us? It seems Miss Morgan and I have encountered each other unconventionally." The minister cleared his throat. "Of course, Miss Catherine Morgan. May I present Mr. Thomas Reed, owner of the Circle R Ranch and chairman of our town council. Mr. Reed, Miss Morgan is a highly qualified educator from Philadelphia who has come to Clearwater Springs in response to your correspondence." Thomas extended his hand. "Miss Morgan, welcome to Montana territory." Catherine accepted the handshake, noting his strong grip and the calluses that belied his wealth. This was no soft-handed businessman, but a man who still worked alongside his wrench hands when necessary. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. It's good to finally meet you in person." His expression remained carefully neutral, though Catherine sensed him taking in every detail of her appearance, the silver threading through her chestnut hair, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of approaching 40, rather than blooming youth. Whatever his private assessment, he maintained impeccable courtesy. "You must be tired from your journey," he said. "And I'm hardly presentable after 3 days on the trail. Perhaps we could meet properly tomorrow. I'll call for you at the boarding house at 10, if that's convenient." "Perfectly convenient, thank you," Thomas nodded briskly. "Until tomorrow, then. Reverend, if you'll excuse us both. I'm sure Miss Morgan wishes to conclude her work here, and I need to check on ranch business." After a formal bow, he departed as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving Catherine to exhale a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well," said Reverend Porter with attempted lightness, "that wasn't exactly how I imagined your introduction would occur." "Nor I," Catherine admitted, sinking onto a nearby chair. "He's returned early, and I've met him looking like a harried schoolmistress rather than a potential bride." The Reverend's kind smile offered some comfort. "If it helps, I believe he was more intrigued than disappointed." "That's generous of you to say, but I saw his expression when he realized who I was." Thomas Reed is a man who guards his reactions carefully, Miss Morgan. Don't assume you've read him correctly based on a brief encounter. He helped her gather the remaining books. Besides, he witnessed you doing what you do best, educating and inspiring others. There are worse first impressions. As Catherine walked back to the boarding house, her mind replayed every moment of the unexpected meeting. Thomas Reed had not been unkind or dismissive, yet neither had he shown any particular warmth. His controlled courtesy revealed nothing of his true thoughts regarding the woman who had traveled so far to potentially become his wife. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, she would face the formal evaluation she had hoped to delay for another 2 days. The abbreviated timeline left no opportunity for further community engagement that might strengthen her position. When Thomas Reed called at the boarding house, he would see Catherine Morgan exactly as she was, an educated woman of 38, with silver in her hair and hope in her heart, offering companionship and capability rather than youth and beauty. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. Dawn brought a crystalline clarity to the Montana sky, with sunlight spilling across, the landscape in golden waves. Catherine had slept poorly, her mind cycling through potential outcomes of her upcoming meeting with Thomas Reed. She rose early and spent an extra half-hour on her appearance, selecting her finest dress, a deep burgundy with modest lace trim. At the collar and cuffs, the gown was practical yet flattering, emphasizing her trim waist while maintaining propriety. She arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical knot, using tortoise-shell combs that had belonged to her mother to sweep her chestnut locks into an elegant coiffure that minimized rather than hid the silver strands. "You look lovely," remarked Dr. Watts when Catherine descended for breakfast. "The color suits you." "Thank you," Catherine replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Mr. Reed is calling at 10, so I heard." News travels swiftly in Clearwater Springs. The doctor's eyes twinkled. Particularly news of Thomas Reed returning early and encountering his mail-order bride while she conducted an educational gathering. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Is the entire town discussing us?" "Not the entire town, just everyone within its boundaries," Dr. Watts replied with gentle humor. "Don't be embarrassed, my dear. The community is impressed by your initiative. Your educational session has already prompted the Ladies' Aid Society to discuss establishing a regular literary circle." This welcome news lifted Catherine's spirits slightly. "Even if things don't proceed with Mr. Reed, I'm glad to have made some positive contribution." A wise perspective. Dr. Watts poured coffee for them both. "Though I suspect Thomas may surprise you. He didn't build an empire by making hasty judgments." After a light breakfast that her nervous stomach barely tolerated, Catherine retreated to the boarding house parlor to await her caller. Martha Holloway had clearly prepared for the significant visit. Fresh flowers adorned the usually plain room, and the worn furniture gleamed with polish. "Mr. Reed is punctual to a fault," Martha advised, adjusting a cushion for the 3rd time. "It's a quality he expects in others as well." Catherine nodded, grateful for any insight into the man, who would soon evaluate her suitability as a life partner. She positioned herself near the window where the light was flattering, but not so revealing as to emphasize the fine lines that time had etched around her eyes. Precisely at 10 o'clock, the clip of horse hooves announced Thomas Reed's arrival. Catherine watched through the lace curtain as he dismounted from a magnificent black stallion, tethering it to the hitching post with practiced ease. Gone was the trail dust from yesterday. Today he wore a well-tailored dark suit and crisp white shirt. His hat, removed as he approached the boarding house door, revealed neatly trimmed hair that curled slightly at his collar. A moment later, Martha Holloway ushered him into the parlor. "Mr. Reed, to see you, Miss Morgan." Thomas entered with a confident stride that immediately commanded the space. In the clear morning light, Catherine could better assess the man who might become her husband. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features weathered by the elements rather than softened by indoor life. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of squinting into sunlight and distance, while his mouth, currently set in a formal line, showed the capacity for both sternness and humour. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her with a slight bow. "I trust you slept well." "After your journey?" "I did, thank you," Catherine replied, extending her hand. "It's good to properly meet you, Mr. Reed." His handshake was firm, his hand engulfing hers briefly before releasing it. Martha discreetly exited, closing the parlour doors to afford them privacy, while maintaining propriety through the house's thin walls. "Please, sit," Thomas gestured to the settle. He took the chair opposite, his large frame making the furniture appear smaller by comparison. "I must apologize for our unconventional introduction yesterday. I had planned to welcome you properly upon your arrival." "No apology necessary," Catherine assured him. "Plans often change when travel is involved." He studied her with those penetrating grey eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail. "Indeed they do, though I confess your early arrival wasn't the only surprise." Here it was, the unavoidable acknowledgement of the discrepancy between his expectations and her reality. Catherine steeled herself, maintaining her poised exterior despite internal anxiety. "Your letters were articulate and thoughtful," Thomas continued. "They revealed an educated mind and practical outlook that I greatly admired. The daguerreotype you sent, however, was entirely accurate, Mr. Reed," Catherine stated firmly. "I sent a recent portrait and was explicitly clear about my age and circumstances." Thomas frowned slightly. "The portrait was small and somewhat unclear. In person you're—" He hesitated, searching for the appropriate word. "Older than you anticipated," Catherine supplied, determined to address the issue directly. To her surprise, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Actually, I was going to say more striking. Your portrait didn't capture the intelligence in your eyes or the character in your expression." Catherine blinked, momentarily disarmed by the unexpected observation. "Age is not my primary concern, Miss Morgan," Thomas continued, his tone measured. "I sought a partner of maturity and substance, not a decorative young bride who would wilt under Montana's harsh conditions. Yet I understand previous potential brides were rejected for various reasons," Catherine replied carefully, "including one for being too young and frivolous." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "The local gossips have been thorough in their reports, I see." "I prefer to call it research," Catherine countered with a small smile. "Understanding previous situations helps me assess my own standing." A genuine chuckle escaped him. "Direct and practical. Your letters suggested those qualities, and I'm pleased to find they're accurate representations." He leaned forward slightly. "Yes, I've interviewed 3 previous candidates for the position of my wife. Each was unsuitable for different reasons, none of which were primarily related to age." "Position of wife," Catherine repeated, both amused and concerned by his business-like terminology. "That's a rather pragmatic description of marriage, Mr. Reed." "I am a pragmatic man, Miss Morgan. The Circle R requires certain qualities in its mistress, just as your Philadelphia Academy doubtless had requirements for its teachers." Catherine considered his comparison. "There's wisdom in knowing what you need in a partnership. However, marriage involves matters of the heart as well as practical considerations." "Indeed." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Though hearts can be impractical guides when building a future. I've seen men lose everything by choosing based on fleeting attraction rather than compatible values and goals." His philosophy echoed Catherine's own experiences with romance, the disastrous engagement in her youth to a charming but irresponsible man who had ultimately abandoned her for a wealthier prospect. That heartbreak had taught her the value of Stability and character over passionate declarations. Perhaps the ideal lies somewhere between cold calculation and reckless emotion, she suggested. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. A balanced perspective. Tell me, Miss Morgan, what prompted a respected Philadelphia teacher to consider becoming a rancher's wife in Montana Territory? The question was fair, if direct. Catherine met his gaze steadily. Several factors converged. The girls' academy, where I taught for 16 years, closed when its benefactor withdrew funding. At 38, I found limited opportunities for new positions. Younger teachers are generally preferred. Additionally, my father's passing left me without family ties to Philadelphia. So necessity drove your decision. Necessity opened the door to possibility, Catherine corrected gently. Your advertisement and subsequent letters suggested a man of intelligence and character building something meaningful. I've always valued purpose over security, Mr. Reed. Thomas studied her with renewed interest. And what purpose do you see in becoming mistress of the Circle R? This was the crux of the matter, what she truly offered beyond domestic management. Catherine chose her words carefully. The Circle R isn't merely a cattle operation. It's a growing enterprise that requires proper administration, social connections, and cultural refinement to achieve its full potential. You've built the foundation through hard work and business acumen. Now you need someone who can transform a successful ranch into a respected establishment that will endure for generations. Thomas leaned back, clearly impressed by her assessment. You've grasped in days what others fail to understand after years. In Clearwater Springs, the cattle and land are merely the beginning. I intend to create something lasting, something that matters beyond immediate profit. A legacy, Catherine supplied. Precisely. His expression grew more animated than she'd yet witnessed. Montana Territory will eventually achieve statehood. When that happens, established families will shape its future. The Circle R should be among them. Catherine recognized the ambition burning beneath his controlled exterior, not merely for wealth, but for significance. This aligned perfectly with her own desires to build something meaningful rather than merely survive. Yesterday's educational gathering, Thomas said, changing direction, was an interesting initiative for someone newly arrived. I prefer activity to idleness, Catherine explained, and I wanted to understand the community's needs and resources. What were your findings? Clearwater Springs possesses remarkable intellectual hunger despite limited educational infrastructure. From advanced students like Sarah Thornton to adults eager for cultural engagement, the potential is significant. Thomas nodded. Sarah is extraordinarily bright. Her father, Daniel, is one of my most valued employees, manages my horse breeding program with exceptional skill. He worries about her future opportunities. As well he might. Minds like hers need proper nourishment. Their conversation continued with surprising ease, moving from local education to broader topics. Thomas revealed himself as widely read despite his lack of formal schooling, with particular knowledge of agriculture, economics, and regional politics. Catherine matched his interests with her own expertise in literature, education, and social organization. Neither mentioned marriage directly again during their hour-long conversation. Yet Catherine sensed the evaluation continuing beneath their seemingly casual exchange. Thomas Reed was assessing her intelligence, adaptability, and potential value to his enterprises, just as she was evaluating whether his ambitions and character aligned with her own needs. As their meeting concluded, Thomas rose and regarded her with newfound respect. Miss Morgan, would you do me the honor of touring the Circle R tomorrow? I believe seeing the operation firsthand would help you understand what partnership with me would entail. I would appreciate that opportunity, Catherine replied, encouraged by this next step. Excellent. I'll send a carriage at 9. He retrieved his hat, then hesitated. One matter remains unclear from our correspondence. Your letters mention teaching as your profession, but not the subjects of your expertise. I specialized in literature and composition, but also taught history and basic sciences, Catherine explained. The Academy's limited staff required versatility. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Versatility is essential in Montana as well, though in different applications. He regarded her with those penetrating grey eyes. Until tomorrow, Miss Morgan. After his departure, Catherine remained in the parlour, processing their interaction. Thomas Reed had been neither as dismissive as she feared, nor as immediately accepting as she'd secretly hoped. Instead, he'd shown himself to be methodical and thoughtful, a man who considered decisions carefully from multiple angles. Whether those considerations would ultimately favour a woman of 38 with silver-threaded hair remained to be seen. But their conversation had confirmed one certainty. Whatever his decision regarding marriage, Thomas Reed was someone whose respect was worth earning on her own merits. Tomorrow's visit to the Circle R would reveal not only his domain, but more. Of the man himself, beyond the formal constraints of a parlour meeting. Catherine found herself genuinely curious about what she would discover, regardless of the ultimate outcome. The promised carriage arrived precisely at 9 the next morning. A well-sprung buggy with gleaming black lacquer and the Circle R brand, emblazoned on its side. The driver was not Thomas himself, as Catherine had half expected, but a weathered man in his 50s who tipped his hat respectfully. "Jackson Miller, ma'am, Mr. Reed's foreman. He asked me to escort you to the ranch." "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller," Catherine replied, accepting his assistance into the carriage. As they left Clearwater Springs behind, the landscape opened dramatically. Rolling grasslands stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still snow-capped despite the early autumn warmth. The vastness made Catherine understand why Thomas had described the territory as both challenge and opportunity. Here, nature remained the dominant force, human settlements merely temporary, scratches on its immensity. "Beautiful country," she commented, drawing her shawl closer against the morning breeze. "Harsh but fair," Miller replied. "Rewards those who respect it, breaks those who don't." He glanced at her assessingly. "Mr. Reed says you're from Philadelphia." "Yes, quite different from Montana. Most Easterners find it too rough out here," he observed. "Too much space, too few comforts." Catherine smiled. "I suppose that depends on what one considers a comfort, Mr. Miller. There's a certain luxury in this openness after city confinement." The foreman nodded approvingly. "Good way of seeing it. Mr. Reed said you had a sensible outlook." "Did he?" Catherine asked, surprised by this positive assessment. Miller's weathered face remained impassive. "He doesn't waste words on people he doesn't respect. The fact he sent me rather than a regular driver says something." Before Catherine could explore this intriguing comment further, Miller pointed toward the horizon. "Circle R begins at that ridge line, 40,000 acres, best. Grazing land in the territory." As they crested the ridge, Catherine drew in a sharp breath. Below spread a verdant valley, bisected by a meandering river. Herds of cattle, hundreds, perhaps thousands, dotted the grasslands, while in the distance horses galloped across fenced pastures. At the valley's heart stood the ranch headquarters, a substantial 2-story house built of golden logs and stone, surrounded by barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and various outbuildings that formed a small, self-contained community. "Mr. Reed built all this?" Catherine asked, impressed by the scale and organization. "Every bit," Miller confirmed with unmistakable pride. "Started with 100 acres and a dozen cattle. Worked alongside us every day, even now that he could afford to just give orders." As they approached the main house, Catherine noticed its careful design. Wide porches wrapped around 2 sides, offering views across the valley. Large windows suggested well-lit interiors, while multiple chimneys promised warmth against Montana winters. Stone flower beds bordered the approach, currently ablaze with late-blooming perennials that softened the frontier architecture. Thomas Reed emerged from the stables as they arrived, striding toward the carriage with that same purposeful movement Catherine had noted previously. Today he wore practical ranch attire, a chambray shirt, sturdy trousers, and boots that had clearly seen actual work rather than merely social occasions. The clothing suited him better than yesterday's formal suit, emphasizing his natural athleticism and confidence. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her, offering his hand to assist her descent from the carriage. "Welcome to the Circle R." "Thank you for inviting me," Catherine replied, accepting his support. "Your land is spectacular." "It's shown its best face today," Thomas acknowledged. "Though winter paints a different picture entirely." "I've read about Montana winters," Catherine said. "Challenging but beautiful in their own right." A smile touched his eyes. An optimistic assessment. "Most visitors focus only on the challenges. I believe perspective determines experience more than circumstances do," she replied. Thomas studied her with renewed interest. "A philosophy that serves well on the frontier." He turned to his foreman. "Thanks for bringing Miss Morgan safely, Jackson. We'll take the full tour if you can spare me until afternoon." "Certainly, boss. The Hereford shipment won't arrive till tomorrow anyway." Miller tipped his hat to Catherine. "Enjoy your visit, ma'am." Thomas offered his arm. "Shall we begin with the house? Mrs. Callahan has prepared refreshments." The main house revealed itself as even more impressive inside. The central great room featured a massive stone fireplace, comfortable furnishings of surprising quality, and walls lined with bookshelves. Catherine couldn't help but gravitate toward them immediately, her fingers tracing leather-bound volumes of history, agriculture, law, and literature. "My one extravagance," Thomas admitted, watching her explore the collection. "Books are shipped from Denver, Chicago, even New York. Mrs. Callahan thinks I'm mad to spend more on books than furniture." "A library reveals the mind that built it," Catherine observed, noting works by Emerson, Thoreau, and even Shakespeare among the practical manuals on cattle breeding and water rights. "Yours suggests a man of both practical knowledge and philosophical depth." The housekeeper, a capable-looking woman in her 60s, arrived with coffee and freshly baked scones. Her shrewd eyes assessed Catherine thoroughly before she nodded with what seemed like cautious approval. "Mrs. Callahan has managed the household since I built it," Thomas explained after she departed. "She and her husband were my first employees. When all this was merely a dream and a patch of overgrazed land." "She seems very efficient," Catherine remarked. "Terrifyingly so," Thomas agreed with unexpected humor. "She's rejected 3 housekeepers and 2 cooks in the past year alone for failing to meet her standards." "Then I should consider myself thoroughly examined," Catherine replied lightly. "Did I pass muster?" Thomas's expression warmed. "She didn't scowl or mutter under her breath, which by Mrs. Callahan's standards is enthusiastic welcome." He gestured toward the bookshelves. "You mentioned perspective earlier. I'm curious, what books shaped yours, Miss Morgan?" The question revealed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Catherine considered carefully. Austen for her insight into human character, Thoreau for his independence of thought, Mary Wollstonecraft for her arguments on education and equality. She smiled slightly. And practical manuals on household management, which proved surprisingly philosophical in their approach to creating order from chaos. This last comment elicited an appreciative chuckle from Thomas. "An eclectic but coherent mix. I find similar wisdom in unexpected sources, breeding manuals that illuminate human behavior, water rights legislation that reflects ancient philosophical principles about shared resources." Their conversation flowed naturally as they toured the house. The downstairs included a formal dining room, a study lined with maps and ledgers, and a small music room featuring a piano that Thomas admitted no one currently played. "It was an optimistic purchase," he explained. "I appreciate music but have no talent for creating it." Upstairs revealed 4 bedrooms, each comfortably appointed though clearly designed with function over ornament in mind. The master suite occupied the house's southern corner, offering spectacular views across the valley through large windows. "The house was built with family in mind," Thomas said as they descended the stairs, "though it remains more potential than reality at present." The subtle reference to his desire for heirs hung between them, neither acknowledged nor ignored. Catherine appreciated his restraint in not emphasizing this aspect of his matrimonial requirements during their tour. Outside, Thomas guided her through the working ranch, the stables where magnificent horses were bred and trained, the barns where winter feed was stored, the blacksmith shop where a burly man shaped horseshoes amid flying sparks. Everywhere Catherine noted efficiency and purpose, with remarkably little waste of either resources or effort. "Most cattle operations focus solely on quantity," Thomas explained, as they watched cowboys sorting calves in a distant corral. "I've chosen a different approach, selective breeding for quality, developing hardier stock that brings premium prices." "You're creating something distinctive, rather than merely extracting value," Catherine observed. Thomas looked pleased by her understanding. "Exactly. The same principle applies beyond cattle. Our horses are becoming known throughout the territory for both beauty and endurance. The hay fields produce double the yield of neighboring ranches due to irrigation innovations." They paused at a fenced pasture where several magnificent horses grazed peacefully. A tall man with sun-streaked hair was working with a spirited chestnut colt, guiding it through training exercises with remarkable patience. "Daniel Thornton," Thomas identified him. "Sarah's father and our horsemaster," Catherine watched with interest. "He has a gentle touch for such powerful animals. Daniel understands that force creates resistance, while patience builds partnership," Thomas replied. "It's why I entrusted him with developing our bloodlines despite his relatively young age." Thornton noticed them and waved, securing the colt before approaching the fence. Up close, Catherine could see Sarah's intelligent blue eyes mirrored in her father's face. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her with genuine warmth. "Sarah hasn't stopped talking about your educational gathering. She completed all your suggested readings in one night." "She's a remarkably bright student," Catherine replied. "You must be very proud." "Immensely," Thornton agreed, "though concerned about her future. There's limited opportunity here for minds like hers." Thomas frowned thoughtfully. "Perhaps not forever, Daniel. Miss Morgan and I were just discussing how the territory is evolving. Educational opportunities should evolve with it." This comment, delivered casually, suggested Thomas was considering Catherine's potential role beyond traditional wifely duties, a promising sign that he valued her professional expertise. Their tour continued to the furthest pastures, where views stretched to snow-capped mountains. Thomas pointed out natural landmarks and explained his water management system that had transformed formerly arid sections into productive grazing land. "Most ranchers simply use what nature provides," he explained. "I prefer to enhance what's available through careful stewardship, creation rather than mere consumption," Catherine noted. "A philosophy that extends beyond ranching." Thomas glanced at her with approval. "You have a gift for discerning underlying principles, Miss Morgan." They stopped for a simple but delicious lunch packed by Mrs. Callahan: cold chicken, fresh bread, and apple tarts served at a scenic overlook where a small stream tumbled over rocks beneath cottonwood trees, just beginning to turn golden. "This is my favorite spot on the property," Thomas admitted as they ate. "When I first purchased the land, I camped here for weeks while planning the ranch layout. The sound of the water helped me think clearly." This glimpse of his more contemplative, Nature intrigued Catherine. The man who had built an empire through determination and strategic thinking also appreciated natural beauty and moments of tranquility. "You seem to have achieved remarkable balance, Mr. Reed," she observed, "building a successful enterprise while preserving what made the land special in the first place." "Balance remains my goal, though it's easier to achieve in ranching than in life," he replied with unexpected candor. "The Circle R succeeds because every element serves its purpose while contributing to the whole. I've been less successful in creating that harmony in personal matters." The admission revealed vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. Catherine responded with equal honesty. "Perhaps because personal harmony requires sharing control rather than maintaining it," she suggested gently. "Something difficult for those accustomed to self-reliance." Thomas studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. "An insightful observation. Miss Morgan, self-reliance becomes habit when there's no alternative. Yet you've created a community here." Catherine gestured toward the ranch complex in the distance. "Dozens of people working toward common purpose under your leadership. A working community, yes, but leadership isn't the same as partnership." His gaze remained steady on her face. "The latter requires a different kind of courage." The moment, stretched between them, waited with unspoken questions about what true partnership might mean for two independent people with established identities and expectations. As they returned to the main house in the late afternoon, Catherine had gained a comprehensive understanding of not only the Circle R's operations, but also the man who had built it. Thomas Reed was indeed impressive, intelligent, hard-working, and visionary, yet his accomplishments had exacted a personal cost in isolation and self-protection that he was only beginning to acknowledge. Whether Catherine herself represented the solution to that isolation remained uncertain. Throughout the day, Thomas had treated her with respect and increasing warmth, but had offered no indication of his ultimate intentions regarding marriage. As Jackson Miller brought the carriage around to return her to town, Thomas assisted Catherine once more, his hand lingering slightly on hers. "Thank you for today," she said sincerely. "Seeing the Circle R helps me understand what you've created here." "And what did you conclude from your observations, Miss Morgan?" Thomas asked, his expression unreadable in the fading afternoon light. Catherine considered her answer carefully. "That you've built something remarkable through vision and determination. Something with the potential to become even greater with the right partnership." A smile touched his eyes, though his expression remained serious. "An accurate assessment. I would value your further thoughts once you've had time to reflect." He stepped back slightly. "Perhaps you would join me for dinner tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock at the Clearwater Hotel dining room." The invitation to a public dinner, rather than another private meeting, surprised Catherine. Dining together at the town's finest establishment would signal to the community that Thomas was seriously considering her as his wife. "I would be delighted," she replied, hoping her voice didn't reveal her inner excitement. As the carriage departed, Catherine glanced back to see Thomas watching from the porch, his tall figure silhouetted against the golden light of sunset. The day had revealed complexities in him that his letters had only hinted at. Strength, certainly, but also vulnerabilities and potential for growth. Tomorrow's dinner would likely determine whether those complexities would remain merely interesting observations or become integral to her own future. Catherine found herself hoping, with unexpected intensity, for the latter. The Clearwater Springs Hotel stood as the town's crowning achievement, a 3-story brick building with actual gaslight fixtures and furnishings imported from St. Louis. Its dining room served as the social center for the community's upper echelon, hosting everything from business negotiations to engagement celebrations. Catherine understood that Thomas's invitation to dine there carried significant weight. She spent particular care with her appearance, wearing her finest evening dress, a midnight blue silk with subtle beading at the bodice that she had originally purchased for Philadelphia symphony performances. She arranged her hair in an elegant twist that acknowledged rather than concealed the silver strands, accenting it with her mother's pearl earrings. Martha Holloway nodded approvingly when Catherine descended the stairs. "You look dignified and beautiful, Miss Morgan. Exactly right for the occasion." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I confess I'm rather nervous." "Perfectly natural. Half the town will be watching this dinner like hawks studying field mice." Martha adjusted Catherine's shawl with motherly precision. "Remember that Mr. Reed chose the venue deliberately. He's making a statement by dining publicly with you." The implications of this observation accompanied Catherine as she walked the short distance to the hotel. Thomas's carriage waited outside, but he himself stood on the sidewalk rather than sending a driver to escort her, another public gesture that indicated respect. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her, his eyes warming appreciatively as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Reed. You're quite handsome yourself." Indeed, Thomas cut an impressive figure in his formal attire. The black suit emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding height, while the crisp white shirt contrasted with his sun-darkened complexion. He had trimmed his beard neatly for the occasion, and his usually windswept hair was carefully combed. He offered his arm, which Catherine accepted with practiced grace. "I hope you don't mind that I chose the hotel," he said as they ascended the steps. "Mrs. Callahan's cooking is excellent, but I thought you might enjoy seeing more of Clearwater's social life." "A thoughtful choice," Catherine replied, though she suspected his motives extended beyond consideration for her interests. The hotel's elegant foyer gave way to a dining room illuminated by crystal chandeliers and decorated with surprisingly tasteful furnishings. Several tables were already occupied, their diners pausing mid-conversation to observe the arrival of Thomas Reed and his potential bride. Catherine maintained her composure beneath the scrutiny, meeting curious gazes with a pleasant smile that neither invited nor discouraged speculation. A silver-haired maître d' escorted them to a prominent table by the windows overlooking the town square. Thomas held Catherine's chair with courteous attention before taking his own seat opposite her. "The salmon is excellent," he recommended as they reviewed the menu. "Shipped in ice from the coast via the railroad. Rather remarkable when you consider it was swimming in the Pacific 3 days ago." "Truly a modern miracle," Catherine agreed, "though I imagine Montana offers its own culinary treasures." "Indeed, the trout from our mountain streams rivals any fish I've tasted elsewhere. Perhaps you'll have the opportunity to try it freshly." Caught someday, the comment suggested future possibilities beyond tonight's dinner, a subtle but encouraging sign. Their conversation flowed easily through the appetizer course, touching on books they had both read, comparing Philadelphia's established culture with Montana's emerging society, and discussing the railroad's impact on Western development. Catherine noticed that Thomas seemed more relaxed than during their previous meetings, his natural intelligence and dry humor emerging as he shared anecdotes about early territorial politics and his initial struggles establishing the ranch. "When I first arrived," he recalled, "local ranchers wagered on how quickly I'd fail. The prevailing theory gave me 6 months before I'd flee back east with my tail between my legs. Yet here you are, 15 years later, owning the largest operation in the county," Catherine noted. "That must be satisfying." "Success is the best response to skepticism," Thomas agreed, then added thoughtfully, "though I've learned that proving others wrong is ultimately less fulfilling than building something worthwhile for its own sake." This glimpse of philosophical depth reinforced Catherine's growing impression of Thomas as a man who had evolved beyond mere ambition to something more nuanced, a realization that made him increasingly attractive beyond his evident prosperity and position. Their main course had just been served when a ripple of interest moved through the dining room. Catherine noticed Thomas's attention shift toward the entrance, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Following his gaze, she observed a striking young woman being escorted to a nearby table. The newcomer was perhaps 25, with luxuriant golden hair arranged in fashionable curls and a crimson dress that showcased a slender figure to dramatic advantage. Her entrance seemed calculated for maximum impact, from the momentary pause at the doorway to the practiced smile she bestowed upon various diners. "Vivian Hargrove," Thomas explained quietly, noting Catherine's questioning glance. "Daughter of James Hargrove, who owns the Mercantile Bank and has significant railroad investments. They relocated from Boston last year." Before Catherine could respond, Vivian herself approached their table, her movement graceful and deliberate. "Thomas, what a delightful surprise finding you here!" Her voice carried the polished accents of Eastern finishing schools. She extended a gloved hand with obvious familiarity. "Father and I were just discussing your water rights proposal over breakfast this morning." Thomas rose courteously, though Catherine detected reluctance beneath his polite demeanor. "Miss Hargrove, I trust your father is well." "Splendid, thank ye." "You, though terribly busy with the new railroad spur negotiations." Her gaze shifted to Catherine with undisguised assessment. "Won't you introduce me to your companion?" The slight hesitation conveyed volumes about Vivian's assumptions regarding Catherine's status, clearly not considering her a social equal or serious romantic prospect for Thomas Reed. "Of course. Miss Vivian Hargrove, may I present Miss Catherine Morgan, recently arrived from Philadelphia." Thomas's tone remained perfectly correct, betraying neither embarrassment nor particular pride. "Miss Morgan is a highly respected educator who has been consulting on improvements to our local school." Catherine offered a pleasant smile, refusing to be intimidated by either Vivian's youth or obvious social confidence. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Hargrove. I understand your family has brought significant investment to Clearwater Springs." "Father believes in the town's potential," Vivian replied, with a dismissive glance that barely acknowledged Catherine before returning her attention to Thomas. "We're hosting a small musical soirée next Saturday evening. Nothing formal, just 20 or so friends appreciating culture in this wilderness. Father specifically asked me to ensure you received an invitation." Thomas nodded non-committally. "Most kind of him." "You simply must attend," Vivian continued, placing her hand on his arm with casual possessiveness. "Elizabeth Blackwood is visiting from Helena and bringing her violin. You mentioned enjoying Mendelssohn last time we spoke." Catherine observed the interaction with interest, noting both Vivian's obvious pursuit of Thomas and his carefully controlled response, polite but without encouragement. The younger woman clearly represented exactly the type of bride most men in Thomas's position would eagerly court. Young, beautiful, well-connected, and from a prominent family whose business interests aligned with his own. Yet Thomas seemed almost relieved when Vivian finally departed with a lingering smile and swish of crimson skirts. He returned his attention to Catherine with a slightly apologetic expression. "Miss Hargrove is rather enthusiastic in her social organizing," he explained, cutting his steak with perhaps more force than necessary. "She seems quite determined to include you in those social plans," Catherine observed neutrally. Thomas met her gaze directly. "The Hargroves have made their ambitions regarding potential family connections quite clear since arriving in Clearwater Springs. They see advantages in an alliance with the Circle R. They see advantages in everything they do. James Hargrove didn't amass his fortune through sentiment." Thomas took a sip of wine before adding, "Vivian received the finest education Boston offers, speaks 3 languages, plays piano beautifully, and knows exactly which political connections benefit her father's interests. Quite the accomplishments, Catherine replied, keeping her tone light despite a sinking feeling. How could she possibly compete with such a package of youth, beauty, and strategic value? Thomas surprised her with a wry smile. Indeed. Yet somehow I find myself more interested in your thoughts on Emerson and irrigation systems than Miss Hargrove's perfect rendition of Chopin or her father's railroad connections. The unexpected comment restored Catherine's confidence. She returned his smile with genuine warmth. Emerson and irrigation make for more sustainable conversation partners, I suppose. Precisely. Thomas's expression grew more serious. I didn't invite you to dinner to discuss the Hargroves, Miss Morgan. I wanted to continue our conversation from yesterday, specifically regarding your impressions of the Circle R and its potential. Catherine considered her response carefully. I was impressed by what you've built, both materially and in human terms. Your ranch operates with remarkable efficiency and purpose. But, Thomas prompted, evidently sensing her unspoken reservation. But I wonder if you've considered how your operation might evolve beyond cattle and horses, Catherine continued. You mentioned creating a legacy that endures for generations, that requires development beyond physical assets. Thomas leaned forward with interest. What specifically do you envision? Educational and cultural institutions that serve both the ranch community and the broader territory, Catherine explained, warming to the subject. The Circle R could become known not only for its livestock, but for its contribution to regional development, a place where innovation extends beyond breeding techniques to human potential. You're suggesting a more comprehensive community building. Exactly. Your foreman's daughter, Sarah Thornton, represents hundreds of bright minds throughout the territory with limited opportunities for advancement. Imagine if the Circle R pioneered educational access, just as you've pioneered agricultural techniques. Thomas considered this, his expression thoughtful. An ambitious vision. No more ambitious than transforming overgrazed land into the territory's leading ranch, Catherine countered, just directed toward different growth. And you would envision yourself directing this development? He asked directly. The question hung between them, the closest they had come to explicitly discussing a potential shared future. Catherine met his gaze steadily. If given the opportunity, I would consider it both a privilege and a responsibility, she replied. I believe my experience could be valuable in such endeavors. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, approval mixed with what appeared to be respect for her measured ambition. You continue to surprise me, Miss Morgan. Most prospective partners focus exclusively on household management or social aspirations. I believe a true partnership includes shared vision beyond domestic arrangements, Catherine said, though I certainly don't discount the importance of a well-managed household. Their conversation deepened as dessert was served, with Thomas sharing more specific aspirations for the Circle R's future, and Catherine offering thoughtful perspectives on educational development appropriate for a frontier community. Neither mentioned marriage directly, yet the underlying premise of their discussion, a potential shared future, remained evident in every topic they explored. As Thomas escorted Catherine back to the boarding house after dinner, they walked, slowly despite the evening chill, seemingly reluctant to end their conversation. The gaslights along the main street cast pools of golden illumination against the darkening Montana sky, where stars were beginning to emerge with remarkable brilliance. I've enjoyed this evening tremendously, Thomas said as they reached the boarding house steps. Your perspective is both refreshing and valuable, Miss Morgan. As is your company, Mr. Reed, Catherine replied sincerely. Thank you for a lovely dinner. Thomas hesitated, clearly weighing something in his mind. I have business in Helena that will take me away for several days, he finally said. But upon my return, I hope we might continue our discussions about potential futures, both for the Circle R and perhaps for ourselves. The carefully worded statement carried significant implications. Catherine felt her heart quicken despite her determination to maintain composure. "I would welcome that conversation," she answered, her voice steady despite her inner excitement. Thomas took her hand, his grasp warm and strong in the cool evening air. For a moment, Catherine thought he might kiss it in the formal manner of Eastern courtship. Instead, he simply held it between both of his own, a gesture somehow more intimate in its understated sincerity. "Until my return, then," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Good night, Catherine." His use of her given name for the first time registered as another small but significant shift in their relationship. "Good night, Thomas," she replied, allowing herself the same intimacy. As she watched him walk back toward the waiting carriage, Catherine felt cautiously optimistic about their evolving connection. Despite Vivian Hargrove's youth and social advantages, Thomas had made his preference for Catherine's company unmistakably clear throughout the evening. Yet, as she prepared for bed, Catherine couldn't entirely dismiss the stark contrast between herself and the younger woman. Vivian represented traditional expectations for a successful rancher's bride, youthful beauty, social connections, and the promise of many childbearing years ahead. Catherine offered intelligence, experience, and mature partnership. But at 38, her potential for motherhood was significantly limited. Would Thomas ultimately choose practical wisdom over conventional expectations? Catherine fell asleep with this question still turning in her mind, her dreams filled with images of the Circle R's sprawling landscape and the man who had built an empire from wilderness. The days following Thomas's departure for Helena brought unexpected developments in Catherine's relationship with Clearwater Springs. Word of her educational gathering had spread throughout the community, prompting requests for a more formal program. Reverend Porter offered the church meeting room for regular sessions, while the Ladies' Aid Society, led by Abigail Holloway, volunteered to provide necessary supplies. "We've discussed establishing something like this for years," Abigail explained during a planning meeting in the Mercantile's back office, "but lacked someone with your qualifications to organize it properly." Catherine found herself immersed in creating a structured curriculum that could serve both advanced students and adults seeking continuing education. The work gave her purpose during Thomas's absence, filling the hours that might otherwise have been consumed with uncertainty about their relationship. Sarah Thornton became her unofficial assistant, helping organize materials and even tutoring younger students in basic mathematics. The girl's intelligence and natural teaching ability impressed Catherine deeply. "Have you considered becoming a teacher yourself?" Catherine asked as they sorted reading materials for different ability levels. Sarah's expression brightened. "More than anything, but Father says there's no proper training available unless I go east, which we can't afford. Sometimes opportunities emerge where we least expect them," Catherine replied thoughtfully, an idea taking shape in her mind. On the 5th day of Thomas's absence, Catherine led her first formal educational session with 18 regular participants, ranging from advanced students to the elderly judge who attended primarily for intellectual stimulation. The structured, yet collaborative approach she implemented allowed participants to progress at different rates while supporting each other's learning. "This is precisely what Clearwater Springs has needed," Dr. Watts declared after observing the session. "Structure with flexibility, advancement without pretension." Catherine was returning to the boarding house that evening, arms filled with student papers, when a sleek carriage pulled alongside her. James Hargrove himself leaned out, a distinguished man in his early 60s, with steel-grey hair and shrewd eyes that assessed her with unabashed directness. "Miss Morgan, I presume. Might I have a moment of your time?" Surprised by this unexpected approach from one of the town's most influential citizens, Catherine nodded. "Of course, Mr. Hargrove." He descended from the carriage with the agility of a much younger man, dismissing his driver with a wave. "Shall we walk? I find conversation flows more naturally in motion." They proceeded down the boardwalk, an unlikely pair drawing curious glances from passers-by. Hargrove came directly to the point with business-like efficiency. "You've made quite an impression in your short time here, Miss Morgan. Your educational initiative has the town talking." "People seem hungry for learning opportunities," Catherine replied cautiously, unsure of his purpose. "Indeed, progress requires educated citizens, something frontier towns often lack." He studied her shrewdly. "I understand you came to Clearwater Springs in response to Thomas Reed's advertisement for a wife." The blunt statement caught Catherine off guard. "Mr. Reed and I have been corresponding, yes, and dining together publicly at the hotel," Hargrove added with a thin smile. "Thomas is not known for impulsive decisions. The fact that he introduced you to Clearwater society so quickly suggests serious intentions." Catherine maintained her composure despite her discomfort with this invasive assessment. "Mr. Reed's intentions are his own to declare, sir." "Admirably discreet," Hargrove approved. "However, I feel compelled to offer some context for your consideration. Thomas Reed is poised at a critical juncture both personally and professionally. His operation requires significant capital investment to achieve the expansion he envisions. I fail to see how this concerns me, Mr. Hargrove." "It concerns you because Thomas's choice of wife will either advance or impede those ambitions." His tone remained pleasant, despite the presumptuous statement. "The Hargrove Bank has considerable resources that could accelerate the Circle R's development through the right partnership." The implication was unmistakable. Catherine stopped walking and faced him directly. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Reed should marry your daughter to secure financial backing?" Hargrove seemed unperturbed by her directness. "I'm merely observing that matrimony in our circles involves practical considerations beyond personal preference. Thomas understands this reality, having built his empire through strategic decisions, rather than emotional ones." Catherine chose her next words carefully. "Mr. Reed strikes me as a man who values substance over appearance and long-term vision over immediate advantage. Precisely why he should consider all factors in such an important decision." Hargrove's expression softened marginally. "Miss Morgan, I mean no disrespect to you personally. By all accounts, you're an accomplished educator, bringing valuable knowledge to our community. But at 38, "My age is hardly a secret, Mr. Hargrove," Catherine interrupted, refusing to be shamed. "Indeed not. But it presents certain limitations regarding family legacy, something Thomas has expressed interest in establishing." His gaze was calculating rather than cruel. "My daughter can offer youth, social connections, and the financial partnership that would secure the Circle R's dominance for generations." The cold assessment stung, despite Catherine's determination to remain unaffected. These were, after all, the same concerns she herself had acknowledged during sleepless nights. "Mr. Reed is quite capable of evaluating his own priorities," she replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare." Hargrove nodded, seemingly satisfied that his message had been delivered. "Of course. Though should you decide that Clearwater Springs offers opportunities beyond matrimony, the academy we're establishing could benefit from your expertise. The position would include housing and a respectable salary." This unexpected offer caught Catherine by surprise. "You're establishing an academy?" "Progress requires infrastructure, educational as well as physical," Hargrove confirmed. "The railroad has made Clearwater Springs a regional hub. An academy would serve families throughout the territory while enhancing property values and commercial development." The proposition was both tempting and troubling. It offered Catherine secure employment, regardless of Thomas's decision. Yet, clearly served Hargrove's dual purpose of promoting his development plans while removing her as competition for his daughter. "I appreciate the information, Mr. Hargrove. Good evening." As Catherine continued toward the boarding house, her mind worked through the implications of this encounter. Hargrove's intervention confirmed her significance in Thomas's considerations. Why else would such a powerful man bother addressing her directly? Yet it also illuminated the forces aligned against a potential match between herself and Thomas, practical considerations that couldn't be dismissed through sentiment alone. The next morning brought unexpected news. Thomas had returned from Helena a day earlier than anticipated. Catherine learned this from Daniel Thornton, who arrived at the church during her educational session with a message. "Mr. Reed requests the pleasure of your company for dinner this evening at the Circle." "Ah," he informed her after pulling her aside. "He sent the carriage to collect you at 6, if that's convenient." "Yes, of course," Catherine replied, trying to contain both her excitement and anxiety. "Please tell him I look forward to it." After the session concluded, Catherine was gathering her materials when Sarah approached hesitantly. "Miss Morgan, May, I speak with you privately." "Certainly, Sarah. What is it?" The girl glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "It's about Mr. Reed and the Hargroves." "I thought you should know what people are saying." Catherine steeled herself. "Go on." "Mr. Hargrove has been telling everyone that his daughter is practically engaged to Mr. Reed, that they're just waiting for the proper moment to announce it." Sarah's expression reflected indignation. "Father says it's nonsense, that Mr. Reed barely tolerates Miss Hargrove's company, but people are believing it because of my age." Catherine finished gently. Sarah nodded miserably. "It's not fair. You're worth 10 of her with all her fancy dresses and affected manners." "Life isn't always fair, Sarah," Catherine replied, touched by the girl's loyalty. "But truth generally emerges in time. Thank you for telling me." This information, coupled with Hargrove's direct approach yesterday, painted a clear picture of coordinated pressure being applied not only to Catherine but to Thomas himself. The wealthy banker was clearly using social manipulation to advance his daughter's prospects, creating expectations that would be difficult for Thomas to disappoint without social consequence. Catherine spent the afternoon preparing for her dinner, with Thomas with particular care, selecting a forest green dress that complemented her complexion while conveying quiet dignity rather than attempting to compete with Vivian's youthful glamour. She arranged her hair simply but elegantly, recognizing that authenticity remained her greatest strength. When Thomas's carriage arrived promptly at 6, Catherine was composed and determined to address the situation directly, rather than allowing uncertainty to undermine their connection. The driver, not Jackson Miller this time, but a younger ranch hand, seemed unusually tense as he assisted her into the vehicle. "Is everything all right at the ranch?" Catherine inquired, noting his evident discomfort. "Yes, ma'am," he replied automatically, then hesitated. "That is, there's been some visitors today. Put everyone on edge a bit." "Visitors?" "The Hargroves, ma'am. Miss Vivian and her father arrived unannounced this afternoon. Been there for hours." He glanced at her apologetically. "Thought you should know before we arrive." Catherine's heart sank at this information, though she maintained her outward composure. "Thank you for telling me. I appreciate your consideration." The implications were troubling. Had Thomas actually invited both Catherine and the Hargroves to dinner? Or had the banker orchestrated this coincidental encounter to force a public choice? Either scenario suggested complications Catherine hadn't anticipated when accepting the invitation. As they approached the Circle R, the sunset painted the landscape in breathtaking hues of gold and crimson that would normally have captivated Catherine's attention. Today, however, her focus remained on the challenging situation awaiting her inside the impressive log house, where 2 carriages already stood in the circular drive, one bearing the Hargrove Bank's insignia. The driver helped her descend, his expression sympathetic. "Mr. Reed asked that you be shown directly to the library upon arrival, ma'am. Said he'd join you there shortly. This private reception, rather than immediate introduction to the Hargroves, suggested Thomas was at least attempting to manage the awkward situation." Catherine followed a maid through the front entrance and into the book-lined room where she had first connected with Thomas during her tour of the house. She had barely settled herself when the door opened to admit Thomas himself. His expression revealed both pleasure at seeing her and strain from the unexpected complications. "Catherine," he said, crossing the room to take her hands briefly, "thank you for coming. I apologize for the unusual circumstances." "The Hargroves appear to have invited themselves to dinner," she observed, meeting his gaze directly. Thomas's jaw tightened. James Hargrove has a particular talent for creating situations that advance his interests. He arrived with Vivian shortly after I returned from Helena, ostensibly to discuss water rights, but clearly intending to establish his daughter's prominence in my home. "A bold strategy," Catherine commented neutrally, waiting to gauge Thomas's reaction. "Transparent and unwelcome," he replied firmly, allaying her worst fears. "However, directly dismissing them would create unnecessary enmity with the town's primary banker when I need his cooperation on several business matters." "So you're accommodating their presence while maintaining your own agenda," Catherine surmised. Smile briefly lightened his expression. "Precisely. Though I deeply regret subjecting you to this awkward situation. Our dinner was meant to be private, a chance to discuss matters of importance to us both." The warmth in his voice when referencing us reassured Catherine more than any explicit statement could have. Thomas Reed might be navigating complex business relationships, but his personal interest remained clearly focused on her rather than Vivian Hargrove. "We'll have other opportunities," Catherine replied with quiet confidence. "Meanwhile, shall we join your unexpected guests? I find difficult situations are best faced directly." Thomas studied her with evident admiration. "Your composure continues to impress me, Catherine. Most women would be justifiably upset by these circumstances. I've faced inadequate school funding committees and disapproving parents' associations," she replied with a hint of humor. James Hargrove's manipulations seem relatively straightforward by comparison. Thomas offered his arm, his expression warming. "Shall we proceed, then? Perhaps this evening might prove enlightening in ways the Hargroves didn't anticipate." As Catherine accepted his arm, she drew strength from his evident support and the growing certainty that whatever challenges awaited in the dining room, they would face them as potential partners rather than separate individuals, a realization that transformed her apprehension into cautious optimism despite the influential banker's obvious opposition. The Circle R's dining room glowed with lamplight that burnished the polished wood table and gleamed against fine china rarely used since Thomas had built the ranch house. Vivian Hargrove occupied a seat at the table's right side, her golden curls arranged to catch the light, her crimson dress a deliberate splash of color against the room's rustic elegance. Her father sat across from her, his imperious posture, suggesting he considered himself the evening's true host rather than an uninvited guest. Both Hargroves looked up as Thomas entered with Catherine on his arm. Vivian's practiced smile faltered momentarily before she recovered with admirable speed. James Hargrove's expression revealed nothing beyond polite acknowledgement, though his eyes assessed the situation with calculating precision. "Miss Morgan, what a delightful surprise!" Vivian exclaimed with artificial warmth. "Father and I had no idea Mr. Reed had invited additional company this evening." "Actually, Miss Morgan was my only invited guest," Thomas corrected smoothly, seating Catherine. At his right hand, the position of honor traditionally reserved for the most important attendee. "It is you and your father who arrived unexpectedly." The gentle rebuke hung in the air as Mrs. Callahan served the first course, a delicate soup that steamed fragrantly in fine china bowls. Catherine maintained composed dignity despite the awkward situation, accepting the soup with a gracious nod. "We've been discussing the prospects for regional development," James Hargrove said, redirecting the conversation with practiced ease. "The railroad spur to Helena opens significant opportunities for those positioned to capitalize on them." "Indeed," Thomas agreed neutrally, "though sustainable growth requires balancing immediate profit with long-term community needs." "Spoken like a true visionary," Hargrove replied, his tone suggesting that visionaries might benefit from pragmatic partnership. "Speaking of community needs, Vivian has been organizing the musical soiree I mentioned. Half the territorial leadership will attend." "Father secured Helena's finest violinist," Vivian added, directing her comments to Thomas while barely acknowledging Catherine's presence. "Governor Wilson's wife has confirmed her attendance. Such connections prove invaluable for anyone with political ambitions." The reference to Thomas's potential political future seemed calculated to emphasize what Vivian could offer that Catherine could not: social entree to territorial governance and the influence that accompanied it. Catherine sipped her soup quietly, observing the dynamics with clear-eyed assessment. The Hargroves operated as a practice team, with Vivian showcasing her social capabilities while her father emphasized practical advantages of alignment with their interests. Under different circumstances, Catherine might have admired their strategic precision. "Miss Morgan has established an educational program that's garnered significant community support," Thomas remarked, deliberately bringing Catherine into the conversation. "Her approach to advanced learning has impressed even skeptical observers." James Hargrove nodded with calculated appreciation. "Commendable work. In fact, I mentioned to Miss Morgan yesterday that our planned academy could benefit from her expertise." "Your planned academy?" Thomas questioned, glancing at Catherine with raised eyebrows. "A necessary investment in regional development," Hargrove confirmed. "Quality education attracts quality settlers, which in turn enhances property values and commercial opportunities." "How interesting that you discussed this with Miss Morgan before mentioning it to the town council," Thomas observed. "Merely preliminary conversations," Hargrove replied smoothly. "Miss Morgan's reputation as an educator precedes her. I believe she could make valuable contributions to Clearwater Springs, regardless of her personal circumstances." The implication hung in the air that Catherine might serve the community through teaching rather than marriage, leaving Thomas free to make a more advantageous match. "I've always believed education forms the foundation of civilized society," Catherine said, entering the conversation with quiet confidence. "Though I find the most effective learning occurs within supportive communities rather than isolated institutions." "Precisely why the Circle R's educational initiative interests me," Thomas added, his gaze meeting Catherine's with evident appreciation. "Integrating learning within working enterprises creates practical knowledge alongside theoretical understanding." The connection between them was palpable. A shared vision that excluded the Hargroves despite their wealth and social positioning. Vivian seemed to sense this, her practiced smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Education certainly has its place," she conceded, "though I've always found that culture elevates communities more effectively. Montana needs refinement more than reading primers." "Perhaps both are essential," Catherine suggested mildly. "Foundations must be solid before ornamentation becomes meaningful." As the main course was served, perfectly prepared beef from the Circle R's own herds, conversation shifted to Thomas's recent business in Helena. He spoke of negotiations with government officials regarding water rights that would impact multiple ranches throughout the territory, including the Circle R. The territorial governor seems inclined to support our position, Thomas explained, though final decisions await the legislative session. Connections prove invaluable in such matters, James Hargrove observed pointedly. Social influence often determines political outcomes more than legal arguments. Quality arguments presented by individuals of integrity ultimately prevail in functioning governance, Thomas countered, his tone reflecting years of experience navigating territorial politics, though I don't discount the value of strategic relationships. Throughout dinner, Catherine noted how Thomas consistently directed substantive conversation toward her, including her in discussions about regional development, educational philosophy, and even ranch operations. While Vivian attempted to showcase her social graces and cultured upbringing, Thomas responded with polite disinterest rather than genuine engagement. As dessert was served, Mrs. Callahan's renowned apple tart, James Hargrove made one final, strategic attempt to advance his agenda. "You mentioned legacy during our last meeting, Thomas," he said, using the familiar address deliberately. "Few considerations prove more important to men who've built something significant. The Circle R deserves to flourish for generations." "I couldn't agree more," Thomas replied, his gaze shifting briefly to Catherine. "Legacy requires proper foundation, values and vision that transcend mere physical assets, and proper partnerships." Hargrove added meaningfully, "both business and personal." A charged silence followed this statement, broken only when Thomas set down his dessert fork with deliberate precision. "Indeed, which is precisely why I invited Miss Morgan to dinner privately this evening." His voice remained pleasant but carried unmistakable firmness. "While I value our business relationship, James, I must be clear that my personal decisions remain exactly that, personal." The banker's expression revealed momentary surprise before his practiced composure reasserted itself. "Naturally. I merely offer perspective as someone with your best interests at heart." "Your concern is noted," Thomas replied, effectively closing the subject. When dinner concluded, Thomas suggested Catherine might enjoy seeing the conservatory he had recently added to the house's eastern wing. The strategic invitation provided escape from the increasingly strained atmosphere, while clearly signaling his preference for Catherine's company. The conservatory proved to be a small but beautiful space, with glass walls and ceiling that would capture sunlight during daytime hours. Now, with evening fallen, strategically placed lanterns illuminated tropical plants and comfortable seating arranged to appreciate the garden and mountain views beyond. "I must apologize again for this evening's complications," Thomas said once they were alone. "No apology needed," Catherine assured him. The situation revealed far more than it concealed. Thomas studied her with evident admiration. Most women would have been flustered by such obvious manipulation. Your composure never wavered. "Years of mediating schoolgirl rivalries proved unexpectedly useful," Catherine replied with gentle humor. "Though I confess I've never before been the object of such determined competition." This candid acknowledgement of the situation drew a genuine laugh from Thomas. James Hargrove typically achieves his objectives through persistence and strategic pressure. He's unaccustomed to encountering resistance. Yet you've maintained your independence despite obvious advantages to aligning with his interests, Catherine observed. Thomas moved to stand beside her at the conservatory's glass wall, where moonlight silvered the landscape beyond. "Financial partnerships, like marriages, should be entered for the right reasons, not merely convenient advantages." The statement hung between them, weighted with significance beyond its surface meaning. Catherine felt the moment's importance. Threshold, they now approached deliberately after days of careful assessment. "I received your letters, you know," Thomas said quietly, "while in Helena, the ones you sent before leaving Philadelphia." Catherine turned to him with surprise. "I thought perhaps they'd gone astray. You never mentioned them." "I wanted to meet you without preconceptions," he explained. "Those letters revealed an exceptional mind, Catherine, thoughtful, educated, and remarkably aligned with my own perspectives on building meaningful legacy. Yet when I arrived, you seemed surprised by my appearance," she noted, addressing directly the issue that had concerned her from the beginning. Thomas's expression softened with unexpected vulnerability. "Not by your appearance, by my response to it. The intelligence in your eyes, the character in your expression, they affected me more profoundly than I anticipated." He took her hands gently in his own, his touch conveying sincerity beyond words. "I've built the Circle R through careful decisions and strategic vision, yet the most important choice, whom to share it with, cannot be made through ledgers and calculations. Vivian Hargrove offers youth, beauty, and advantageous connections," Catherine stated, needing his explicit acknowledgement of what he would forsake in choosing her. "She offers shallow soil that couldn't sustain deep roots," Thomas replied firmly. "I sought a wife before meeting you, Catherine. Now I seek a partner, specifically you." The directness of his statement took her breath momentarily. "Despite my age, the potential limitations regarding children, because of who you are," he answered without hesitation. "Your mind, your character, your strength. The silver in your hair reflects wisdom earned through living fully. Parenthood can take many forms, including mentoring children like Sarah Thornton, who hunger for knowledge." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "I've spent my life building something meaningful from raw materials others overlooked. I recognize value that others miss, beauty that reveals itself through character rather than mere appearance." Catherine's heart beat rapidly as Thomas drew her closer, his expression revealing emotion typically kept carefully controlled. "I didn't expect to find love through practical correspondence," he admitted softly. "Yet here you stand, the perfect partner I never knew to seek until you arrived." "Love?" Catherine echoed, hardly daring to believe the word. "Love." Thomas confirmed, his voice certain, discovered not in youthful passion, but in profound recognition of matching spirits. "Will you stay, Catherine? Not merely as my wife, but as my true partner in everything the Circle R can become." In that moonlit conservatory, surrounded by carefully tended life, brought to flourish far from its native environment, Catherine found her own transplanted heart blossoming with unexpected joy. The journey from rejected mail-order bride to cherished partner had transformed her understanding of both herself and the meaning of true beauty. "Yes," she answered simply, her voice steady with certainty. As Thomas drew her into his embrace, Catherine realized that her silver-threaded hair and the wisdom in her years had never been flaws to overcome, but treasures to be discovered by a man with vision to see beyond surface appearances. Here in Montana's vast landscape, she had found not merely acceptance, but genuine appreciation for exactly who she was. Their kiss sealed a partnership founded not on conventional expectations, but on mutual respect, shared vision, and the deepest beauty of all, two souls recognizing themselves in each other, ready to build a legacy that would transform not only their lives, but the future of Clearwater Springs itself. For Catherine Morgan had indeed been rejected for being too old, until a wealthy rancher with the wisdom to see beyond appearances discovered the hidden beauty that would make her not merely his bride, but his perfect partner in creating something truly enduring. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.